name is Christina Liu, and welcome to Cloud Vendor Risk Management and Risk Assessment for Beginners. Who am I? Well, I am a senior security engineer at Cisco Meraki. I am also a certified information privacy technologist. On Twitter, I am at Clusulu, also accepting Blue Sky invites if anyone has one. And also I have a website, christina-liu.com. So, let's go. Table of contents. What will we cover in this talk? First, we're going to talk about what is risk assessment and risk management. Then we'll go into why this is important. 3, we'll get into how we perform one of these risk assessments. And then finally, 4, we're going to talk about what skills and other experience would be applicable to this branch of security. So what is it, risk assessment? It is essentially the measurement of risk associated with integrating or sharing your company or organization data with a third-party cloud vendor. Examples of third-party cloud vendors is applications like Slack, AWS, GitHub. Essentially, it's any application or software where you don't own the code to and that you are using. For the measurement, you usually rank them in some sort of, say that this application is a low risk, medium risk, or critical or high risk to your organization. So after you give the measurement, then you can determine if the risk is acceptable for you to share or your company to share its data with. Because sometimes maybe installing that sketchy dog emoji counting Slack app is not worth the risk, but the installing and the usage of Slack is worth the risk. Now that you've determined whether or not you want to use this, you can think of any mitigations or other security controls that would need to happen before vendor integration happened. Essentially, you're trying to ask what needs to happen to be able to let the teams use this vendor with as little risk to the organization as possible. So why is this important? Why is this important? Well, because data breaches are bad and expensive. And data breaches can happen from internal security misconfigurations, but they can also happen if your vendor does not keep your data safe. And it stings extra bad when it's coming from a vendor because you are a lot of the times paying money to an organization with the expectation that they will keep your data safe. There are going to be compliance standards that will require risk assessment or risk management programs. So certifications like SOC 2, PCI, they will require these programs. And if you know that you're going to be going for these programs, it's a good idea to get this started early than later because it's always a mad rush at the end to get everything ready. Oops. Yep, there we go. And risk assessment management and risk assessment programs are going to look different across companies depending on a bunch of different factors, like the size of your company or the security program maturity of your company. Now, here are some things to consider, 6 specifically, 6 things to consider for third-party vendor reviews. First, you're going to want to figure out the authority of the requester. This basically means, does the requester, the person asking you to do this vendor review, have the authority to sign for contracts and to pay for applications? And you want to do this because, 1, you don't want to waste your time doing work that won't get approved, or if even their lead won't approve this application. Also, due to security features and data restrictions, you may have to purchase the enterprise version of whatever application you're reviewing, because a lot of the time, the free version will not have things like single sign-on or logging or other security features that would be required. And when you do establish the authority of this requester, you establish an application owner in case an incident happens and this is someone that people can go and contact. This person is usually a senior manager or director, and if you're in a smaller organization, it's really the human with purchasing power. So if you're in a small startup, it could be as simple as the person with a credit card. And finding this person in a larger organization can potentially be tricky. So you would want to work with something like a procurement or a finance or a legal team to find this person, because and you'll be working with these teams closely, because a lot of the times, if procurement doesn't pay the vendor's bill, the vendor will not provide your services. And if the legal team doesn't approve of the contract, then the vendor won't be onboarded. So you'll be working very closely with those teams. So another thing you want to think about is the idea of data classification. And that is essentially taking different types of data and putting it into buckets. So generally these buckets are, is this data considered public? Is this confidential, highly confidential, or restricted data? And here's some examples of the different types of data that could be restricted or confidential. So personally identifiable information, known as PII, basically information that can let you identify an individual. There's HIPAA data, which is healthcare privacy data. And the data here is generally of a more restricted class because there are laws and regulations that dictate what you can and cannot do with this data. HIPAA can have severe financial fines and even potentially jail time. And there are other types of data that do not have regulation and laws that you need to protect, but they can potentially affect the public perception of your company. So information you would want to protect is active sales leads data, right? Because you don't want the competition company to find out who you're talking to. Also, information about unreleased products, because if information about this stuff leaks, then it doesn't look good for the company. What you're going to want to do here is work with a legal team to create these data classifications, because as I said in the beginning, some of the data that you'll be encountering and classifying will actually have to be done in a certain way due to laws and regulations. And you're going to want to create a tool called a data matrix. The data matrix is a rubric that can help you determine how you do these reviews, when they need to happen, and who approves, amongst other things. So for example, if you look in the pink column, the buckets, right, the data classification, is this application considered public, confidential, restricted? And you can do things like, say, for applications that are considered public or confidential, we just need to do some sort of like third-party risk scan. And if the scan comes out fine, then we can classify this as low risk. But if there's an application that is considered restricted, then we may have to trigger a pen test to be able to thoroughly assess the risk of this app. And if your company has some sort of privacy or ethics team, they should be brought in for input as well, because privacy is an incredibly fast evolving sector, and what might not be law right now could be law in like the next year or even in the next couple of months, depending on what state you're in and the type of data that you're dealing with. So now we get into what's the implementation review, which is the portion where you're going to be speaking to the team, the internal team that wants to use this application. So you're going to want to ask, what other systems is this application connecting to? Because we are living in a world where dashboards and integrations are just integral to what we do. So for example, a team wants to use Salesforce, right? But Salesforce, while a very powerful app, also will have the ability to connect to, say, AWS or Slack or any other applications and tools to help the team do their job. And due to asking this, this may lead to more vendor reviews. Information that you're going to need from the team is data diagrams, right? You want to see where the data is flowing to, what data is going, and the types of security controls we have in the network and in the system. You may potentially be reviewing API object calls to make sure these objects aren't disclosing sensitive data unnecessarily. You're going to be doing a lot of threat modeling with the teams. And a good way to do this, to get the team involved with you, is to ask them to put their hacker hat on and ask them if they were to hack the system, how would they do this? After you figure out the point of attack, then you can ask them what implication or is the impact of this attack. After that, you then ask, do we have any mitigating controls somewhere down the chain to lessen the impact or mitigate the attack? And a bonus here is that people kind of start thinking like this in their own personal lives as well. So it's a great way to do a little bit of tricky security inception. And you will be having conversations with almost every team in the organization. So you will need to be able to speak to and define remediations and requirements for both engineers and also what I call the run the business teams, right? Like the sales, the marketing, everyone else that's not in the engineering department, because you're reviewing so many different types of applications. And because of this, you end up being seen as a security influencer and advisor for a large swath of the company. So after that, what you're going to also need to do is get documentation and reports from the vendor themselves so that you can get an accurate picture of what their security posture looks like. Some documentation that you're going to want from the vendor, if they have it, is a SOC 2 Type 2 report. It's a huge report, has a lot of great information about what their security posture and controls are like in the vendor's own internal networks. If they have any PCI certifications or if they have an ISO 27001 certification, you're going to want to take a look at that and check to see that it hasn't expired. If they have any penetration test reports that they're willing to share, you would want to take a look at that. Some companies may not want to share the entire report, so you can often ask for an executive summary, which will help. And you can also ask for anything else, right? Like if they have information on bug bounty programs, if they have any security white papers they've written, any blog posts, anything like that. You're essentially trying to get your hands on anything that will let you get a clear idea of what their security posture looks like. And a special note about the industry certifications, the PCI, the SOC 2, things like that, those are not green lights on their own to say that this vendor is automatically low risk. But what it does do is that it helps the risk go down, because in order to get those certifications, companies have to be audited every year to maintain certifications. And it's not an internal audit, it's a third-party external audit that they have to go through. And at the end of this review, you're going to produce a risk score. And this risk score is this application low, medium, or high risk. It can be super official, like a report that has the risk score and then also any requirements and things like that to implement safely. But also, if it's a smaller program, you can just write it as a JIRA ticket. And really, depending on how this risk score looks like, depends on the size of your company and the program maturity. Now, a note about the risk score as well, it is not security saying approving or denying an application. We're simply saying, we think it's this risky and it is up to the application owner to then accept to approve or deny this app so that they can make this decision consciously. Now, from that, we then move into the risk acceptance portion. And this is important because sometimes accepting the usage and implementation of a high-risk app is worth it. Sometimes high-risk apps are integral to sales contracts or feature releases. A lot of the times, well, all the time, upper management will have information that you're not privy to, and you may just have to implement it because upper management said so. But if they do this, and if they have to make these compromises, then at least they are consciously accepting this risk. So what you want to do is get that risk acceptance in writing, either in some sort of an email or a JIRA ticket of the application owner, whoever, this manager, senior manager, director is, saying that, oh, I accept the risk score. I know what I'm getting myself into, essentially. Because this is an important step to establishing a contact person, again, in case there is an incident. Another thing you're going to have to think about eventually down the line is the idea of risk of reassessment, because vendors need to be reassessed on a regular schedule to ensure that they maintain a high quality of security and compliance. Sometimes vendors will lose their certifications, and it will affect the risk score if they lose a certification. Also, as time goes on, the team that wants to use this will grow and change. Or other teams may find out about this tool and also want to use it. So, for example, if there's a team like the sales team that initially brought this app in, but then for some reason, like HR or recruiting then now wants to use this application, well, the use case may have changed. And in addition to the use case, the data classification may have changed as well, because generally HR data is classified much higher than sales data. So a good way to track when something needs to be reassessed and when to put it on that schedule is based on the data classification. So if you remember from the matrix in the beginning, we can say that public applications only have to be reassessed every 3 years, or highly confidential restricted applications that have to be reassessed every single year. So make your life easier, create that data matrix, and have everything on a schedule. Yep, let the data matrix guide you. Now, if you are a subsidiary in a larger organization, don't reinvent the wheel. Risk assessment and risk management has been around for quite some time now. So if you're in that larger organization, there may be existing policies that you can adopt or use that as a framework if you can. Here is a good resource to get security questions. So it is called CAKE. It stands for Consensus Assessment Initiative Questionnaire. And what this is it is a 70-question questionnaire that has all sorts of great questions about, for the vendors, saying oh, do they use MFA internally? How often is their staff trained in security best practices? Do they have, firewall policies and things like that within the organization? And this questionnaire is good for those vendors that do not have larger certifications. So if they don't have the SOC 2, or if they don't have PCI. And this questionnaire could be good for if an application is of a lower data classification, so say confidential or public, they may be able to just use this questionnaire, and then you can get a security posture, an idea of what their security posture is, and get that risk score from this. If your organization needs to have a more robust and mature risk assessment and risk management program, you may want to check out NIST. A lot of the compliance programs will framework themselves on NIST, so good place to check it out if you need something quite robust. Also, a good thing to ask is, what does your parent organization have? Because again, they may already have policies in place. They may have tools that you can use that you don't have to pay for. Examples of some third-party tools that will do risk assessment for you is tools like CyberGRX, Security Scorecard, even CAKE will do that. And using these scanners and third-party assessors could be good for those lower data classification apps to save you time. Now, how do we get this job? Well, this type of work is generally within what's called the enterprise security branch. We hear a lot about, red team, blue team. I don't think this team has a name or a color. It's just enterprise security. You want to check out stuff in the governance risk compliance chunk, so the GRC world. And here is the type of experience that can help enable you to do this work. So if you have any sort of dev experience, this is super helpful because you will potentially be reviewing JavaScript snippets. You will be reviewing SQL queries to make sure that sensitive data isn't being passed unwittingly. You'll be reviewing JSON blobs. If you have experience threat modeling, if you're really good at it, awesome. You're going to be doing this all the time. If you aren't good at it yet or haven't started this, you want to check out the STRIDE methodology, which is a very popular one that people use. If you're very good at searching for documents, because you'll be getting large 40-page documents from vendors. And so if you can find this information quickly, awesome. And the most important here really is strong communication skills, because you will have to communicate these requirements to both dev teams and the non-dev teams. A lot of the times, you may be the first security person that the submitter has ever talked to. So a lot of your job will be doing security education for basic security principles as well. And finally, if you have any skills from any other jobs or industries, this is important because you're going to be reviewing so many different types of applications. You'll be reviewing, applications like Slack apps that count dog emojis, to recruiting apps, to UX tools, to AWS. So it really runs the gamut. But yeah, so once again, thank you so much for watching. I am Christina Liu. I want to say big thanks to folks on the internet and also to Day of Security.